Good evening, I'm Jabari Morris, and this is M&T Mondays. Tonight, we will learn the truth about cryptocurrencies and the issues involving their mining and use. After watching this, you'll be able to make your own informed decisions about crypto. Make sure to hit the like and subscribe buttons, and let's get to it. Warren Mosler explains that cryptocurrencies are commodities, not currencies.
Any government could also decide to use Bitcoin or the dollar or any other foreign currency, for that matter, to fund its operations, to provision itself. Right?
Yeah, they could, but they haven't done that yet. If they use Bitcoin, they're still valuing it in terms of dollars or euros or something. It has an exchange. They're using it as a commodity and not as an actual unit of as a tax credit. They're not saying your taxes for the year are 0.7 Bitcoin, no matter what the value of the Bitcoin does. So they're just using it as a numeraire. And countries have used a lot of things as numeraires, and that's fine. Oil is priced in dollars. That's a numeraire. You can pay for anything you want. But so it's a reference. They're using it as a reference, and that's okay. And that falls under the framework of analysis. And if they wanted to use it as the actual credit, that would work too. Now, it's been too. They haven't come up with a workable way to do that. I don't think anybody has. I haven't seen it. That they've come up with a workable way to use a Bitcoin, as a tax credit. But maybe somebody could do that. In which case, it'll fall under the same framework. Right now, it's just an asset like gold. Gold's existed for a long time, and there have been attempts to use gold as the unit, as a tax credit, and define the currency in terms of so many ounces of gold. And it's persisted for periods of time, but like you said, it's got limitations. You can't sustain full employment. You can't fight a war. You can't do a lot of things. You have to then suspend that. Otherwise, a lot of the things that governments want to do, presumably the will of the people, but I don't want to argue that too much. Doesn't work under gold as a unit or Bitcoin as a unit. It just doesn't. It's just dysfunctional. So if somebody could make it functional, I'm sure that would fit right in. So I'm not categorically against it. I just don't see it now fitting, the role that state currency plays, the tax credits play right now.
It will be interesting to see in the future if there's indeed a country at some point who's going to fund itself completely with using a decentralized asset such as Bitcoin and not relying anymore on its own currency to issue.
I think they're going to be relying on tax credits because without coercive taxation, there's no way to provision a government that I've ever seen. So it's always force and coercion somehow. Yeah. So they'd have to somehow coerce a need for these things, and right now there's no use value for any of it. It's just
unless there's market demand. If let's say a lot of big companies are going to require payments in Bitcoin, for example, and there's a lot of big companies that already accept it or are going to accept it, then there's a market demand. So then you don't necessarily need to have the tax coercion in order to have value in the currency.
So far those companies that accept it, it's a numeraire. So if you go to buy a Tesla, they'll look at the price of Bitcoin versus the dollar price of the car, and then they'll tell you how many Bitcoin. They don't just say a car is going to cost 1 Bitcoin, which is about the cost of a Tesla. And even if the dollar price goes up and down, it's going to be 1 Bitcoin. Companies haven't done that yet. I'm not saying some company won't do that, but.
In this episode of Macaroni and Cheese, Rohan Gray expresses concern about the innocent consumption used to mine crypto and believes that many arguments by supporters of crypto are in bad faith.
Obviously, the environment is of great concern. And the way that you earn coins currently, I know we talked a little bit about this earlier with stake versus trying to earn coins. But there's got to be some sort of a theory of energy as it pertains to any kind of new economic world, especially given the existential crisis we face within our current climate situation. And I think that Green New Deals and things like that are important concepts, but then you start thinking about this digital framework that goes alongside of it that is screaming along at breakneck speeds while we're screaming along to flooding and coastal destruction and climate refugees. I can see a world where having a currency that is not tied to a geographic area, that if my area is suddenly underwater, I'm still able to survive. These are hyperbolic scenarios, but there's potential for this. As an MMTer, trying to understand how that fits into this new space, how you might present that to someone that's first hearing this.
So this actually gets us back to something I didn't pick up on earlier, but want to make sure I pick up on now, where you said you think this space is a bubble. Well, Nathan Tanker's just had a good piece out on his Substack. It's behind the paywall, but if you can afford it, I encourage people to subscribe. It's obviously good stuff. But he was saying, in his view, Bitcoin isn't a bubble, in part because bubble dynamics often imply a liquidity failure or a failure to honor certain commitments, which would definitely be the case potentially for something like stablecoins, which promise redemption into fiat. But for something like Bitcoin, it isn't promising redemption into anything else other than itself. So it may very well experience price volatility and may very well be in an unsustainable upwards spiral. But that doesn't necessarily mean that its price is artificially valued now relative to some fundamental price. And also that its fundamental price isn't necessarily zero, but it is rather socially and culturally determined. And as long as there's a bunch of true believers that believe in it, in the same way as people like trading cards, as long as people like baseball, there's going to be some value there. And the value of that industry is going to be directly proportional to the community around it and the culture around it. In the same way as when you have thousands of screaming kids obsessed with Beanie Babies, it doesn't matter what you think the intrinsic value of them is. Other people are going to value those things out. The reason that that's important here is because I think in the same way as tribal identities in general and political identities in general often become reflexive, that is to say, they end up reflecting feedback loops of themselves as much as external forces, that you have a situation where this community is bought into this set of symbols, this constellation of groups and competencies and technologies and historical stories they tell each other and reinforce each other, and spaces, these big conferences, certain media channels, etc., that they identify, right? They identify not just in a transactional sense, but in a cultural ideological sense as part of a movement. And that movement is organic in the same way as an MMT movement is organic, in the sense that it can evolve, it can change. The common part there becomes preserving the symbols and working out what things are more or less fundamental at any point in time. You don't have to go back to Philosophy 101 or those stories about all the human cells in a body getting replaced every 7 years or whatever it is, but you take away this piece and replace it with another one to upgrade over time, and you take another piece away, and then before you know it, he's more machine than man or whatever, but you may have replaced a considerable amount of what you started with, and at no point in time did it stop having a continuity with previous iterations of it. And so there was a period for a long time where the proof of work, the idea that you have to engage in excessive computational exercises to mine blocks that then give you claims on the currency that then power the network, was a good thing, because that stopped any person, their dog, coming in and trying to launch an attack on the decentralized consensus mechanism. You had to pay to have a chance at doing that, and it would be expensive to try to go to the extent it would take to actually succeed with an attack like that. Although a few people tried, obviously. Nowadays, of course, you're starting to hear other arguments coming out of those spaces. People saying, well, we're actually moving away from proof of work. So whatever the energy costs now, they will change over time. They will become less. In fact, we're looking for other ways to make it less costly rather than more costly over time. That's one response. Another response is, have you seen the other guys? Are you telling me that the current fiat system is good? And I don't think any of us need to defend the current extractive, fossil fuel intensive economy. But that's very different from saying, look, a trusted digital monetary system could achieve the same transactional frequency with far less overhead, far less energy wastage, which is an argument that is also made in the privacy context, right? When you are taking in every piece of data, right? You go to a website, and then the website tracks you, and then your browser tracks you, and then the software system tracks you. Suddenly, the act of sending a request for a 10 kilobyte web page and then getting that 10 kilobyte web page served to your computer from the web server is megabytes worth of data. It's significantly more traffic because it's sort of like sending a very small thing in a massive package with styrofoam and 4 boxes and all that kind of stuff, you know?
Yeah.
You've turned a very lean transaction into a very convoluted one because you've added all this tracking and bloat. So suddenly now there is more energy in saying, okay, we're trying to change. Also, they're even worse. And then you're starting to see some of these more creative arguments, whereas, well, actually, the energy that we're using wasn't going to be used by anyone else anyway. So we're subsidizing potentially clean energy investors to be able to sell their energy more so that they have more money to invest in even more clean energy. It's sort of like somebody needs to buy up the farmers' surpluses so that they don't go out of business so they can keep making food for us all. You know, it's that kind of logic, right? We're buying up the leftover energy. Then others are saying, well, you know, actually, China's just cut down on Bitcoin mining, and that's a good thing because now that energy and interest is going to move to other jurisdictions that have better energy practices. Actually, a lot of energy companies are partnering with cryptocurrencies to make green projects and to fund their research and development. So there's all these narratives coming out. But the important thing, at least to me, to remember, these are ex post rationalizations. This is a community that's starting with the idea that crypto or Bitcoin, Ethereum, whatever, is good. It should exist. And any problems are outweighed by the benefits. And so if there are problems, well, we'll just take that hand off and replace it with a different hand. And we'll just take that leg off and replace it with a different leg. We'll just patch over that gaping wound there. And it can't fail. It can only be failed by us if we let it fail. So we have to keep trying. And if some of these concerns may be bullshit and we'll push back against them, some of them may be legitimate. We'll probably push back against them too, but eventually we'll concede. And when we concede, we'll integrate them in and say, okay, this is just further impetus to reform and improve. This isn't proof of a fatal flaw or a fatal failure. So that's how I see those kinds of things coming together. I think it's undeniable they have a massive energy usage right now. I think it's undeniable that one of the reasons for that energy usage is that they're trying to build systems that require no trust in a monetary system. And I think that's a failed endeavor. And if they gave up that, they might have moved to a very different path of technological development. So in that respect, I think they are culpable and can be very widely criticized for their energy consumption. And I think when you stop assuming that every argument they come up with is in good faith and spending the 25 hours to debunk every claim that takes 10 minutes to make and accept it as a form of motivated reasoning, it helps you situate the responses coming out a lot more realistically.
The blockchain socialist shows the biggest issue with cryptocurrency is connected to the neoliberal belief about money, artificial scarcity.
How do we get the blockchain left to realize the way fiat works as well so that we have a two-headed dragon? We're never going to get a Green New Deal with Bitcoin. That's not how this will happen. It's going to have to come from the nation state to mobilize through the power of law. How do we get people to understand there's two battles going on?
Yeah. I think most people in my community understand how government spending works. The libertarian story or the liberal story about you have to tax and spend.
Right.
I totally understand the frustration. I think MMT is a very good explanation of how governments spend money and where money comes from in the nation state in most of our lives. Where I think MMTers get wrong when it comes to cryptocurrency, they're taking too seriously the spokespeople of the currency world. I totally admit 99% of Bitcoiners will talk about what you're saying, that government spending is bad and that the US is terrible because of huge debts and we're all going to go broke eventually.
Right.
Like, it is a very, very silly story. And so they like Bitcoin because of its artificial scarcity. But when I say artificial scarcity, I'm talking about a specific type of artificial scarcity in that it is their attempt to try to make something like gold, like a digital gold, in that they have a cap, right? There's X amount of Bitcoin, like as if there's X amount of gold in the world that you can ever create. So that's going to be the maximum. It's really heavily based on this commodity theory of money and especially libertarian view that the best type of money can be abstracted away because it's backed by a commodity which has objective value, as if gold is really objectively valuable. So I think part of the issue is that a lot of these first cryptocurrencies, especially Bitcoin, were designed intentionally with this hard money view in mind. They encoded hard money into Bitcoin. It does not have to be hard money. You could, if you wanted to, copy and paste the code of the Bitcoin network and where it comes from, and you can take out the line of code that there's only going to be 21 million Bitcoin. You can adjust a couple of other things, and you can turn it into a non-hard currency in this sense.
Yeah, very cool.
You can also, if you want to, if there were a bunch of communists or socialists in this space and they were really early and they wanted to make a cryptocurrency, I think what we would have probably prioritized is having a more democratic attempt at making a cryptocurrency. So I think part of the frustration about the monetary system and the way governments spend their money, I think everybody feels the frustration. Libertarians are also frustrated with the way that money is spent. I think we on the left are also frustrated with the way that money is spent because the government uses these lies about having deficits. But I would argue that the frustration ultimately is caused because the monetary system is very non-democratic.
Yes.
We have zero say in what happens to our money, where our money goes. If we make new money, basically what money is deciding is where do we prioritize putting our resources in the economy and in society.
As we can see, there are a lot of misconceptions about cryptocurrencies. Those that stand to benefit from their use are deeply rooted in neoliberal and libertarian beliefs about money. The technology of the blockchain can be useful, but promoting Bitcoin, Ethereum, and other cryptocurrencies as actual currency is dangerous. If you enjoyed tonight's video, make sure to check us out at realprogressives.org and subscribe to get notifications of our new video streams in YouTube, Periscope, Twitch, Facebook, and Rockfin. Thank you, and continue learning.